Hey there, Elise. I got some flowers for you today, sweetie, Myrna said, as she placed the vase of freshly picked flowers by the bed. As part of her duties as the church outreach organizer, she visited the Far Haven nursing home at least once every 2 weeks. One of her favorite residents was the beautiful, dark-haired young woman who had been introduced a few months previous. Although the girl was completely unresponsive to outside stimuli, Myrna made it her habit to come in and visit with her at least for a few minutes during her visits. One of the CNAs had told her that the girl had become catatonic soon after learning that her husband had been killed on the way to the hospital after an accident at work. Myrna had lost her own husband many years before to cancer and felt a certain understanding with the young woman who had no family or friends to visit. She looked at the young woman and reminded herself that the girl had always appeared just as still and lifeless as she did now. Her eyes, although open, stared empty and dull at the far wall, and her chest barely even rose to show signs of respiration. Sometimes Myrna would gaze at the feeding tube taped over the girl's mouth and wondered if it wouldn't be merciful to remove it. Sighing, Myrna looked at her watch and realized she was running late. She took her remaining gift items and left the room, wondering if the girl would ever awaken. "Wake up," said the voice harshly. It was distant, but Elise could hear that it was angry and impatient. "We don't have time for this. You must wake up now." The voice was female and sounded as if it had a German accent. Elise was wandering in a dark forest where the wind was blowing dried dead leaves in brown, red, and orange waves over the ground. At the edge of the forest, she came to a hill which overlooked a distant city. To her horror, all was in ruin, and for miles around the dead were shambling through the piles of rubble and carrion as clouds of flies loomed like a fog over the entire landscape. She looked down the ravine and saw ghastly, bloated forms crawling amongst the scattered buildings and concrete. She wanted to scream when she realized that they were giant maggots, lurching, throbbing over the destruction. "Is this what you want?" the voice called out from behind her. She turned and saw a woman in a black dress standing on the path, her blonde hair blowing over her cold, pale skin in the breeze. "Who are you?" Elise cried out as the wind began to build and the stark, lifeless trees swayed. "Your only hope for getting out of here," the woman replied. "But where am I?" Elise looked around, but could see only the forest, and hear only the wind and the distant sound of a million buzzing insects. "You are halfway inside the flies world, and I don't think you would like to step in completely. Now come." Elise watched as the woman began walking back up the path towards a door which was sitting of itself in empty space. The woman grabbed the knob and threw it open to reveal a blinding brilliance of white light. "But I don't want to die," Elise yelled as she stepped back, almost falling over the edge of the ravine. "It's not a door to death, you idiot," the woman said with frustration. "This goes back to the real world. Now come on. I can't hold it open forever. I am using your energy to keep it open. How do I know I can trust you? Seriously, you would risk being trapped here because we haven't been formally introduced." Elise looked over her shoulder and saw one of the car-sized maggots crawling closer up the side of the hill. She began walking forward and saw that the woman had extended one soft white hand for her to take. She reached forward and immediately felt a sense of safety as she was led through the door and into the light. Clarity. She snapped up and instantly felt a horrible, choking sensation. She gagged and struggled as tears ran from her eyes, and she ripped the strange device from her mouth and pulled a long plastic appendage from within her throat. She sat coughing and retching for a moment as her head spun with nausea. The room was dark. There was another bed beside her that lay empty. Where am I? She began to vaguely remember being wheeled into an emergency room. There had been sorrow, loss, despair. All she had known had been taken from her. She had been completely and utterly alone for the first time. It hadn't even been a few days before she had just began to give up. She had felt like she was dying, but then again, she had felt dead for many years. She had been living as if in a dream that continued after the shooting, but had never been truly alive. All there had been was Charlie. Charlie had taken care of her. Charlie had loved her. Charlie had saved her. But she never really knew how. He had been her only friend and her only family. And then he was dead. He's not dead, the voice said in her mind. She looked around the room, but could see no one. She remembered the voice and knew that it was the woman from the dream. If you want to help him and yourself, then you've got to get out of here quickly before the nurses come to check on your alarm. Elise saw that there was indeed a light flashing beside her on the monitor. Pulling the cords from her arms, she swept her heavy, limp, feeling legs over the side of the bed. Her head swam, and the room was moving beneath her as she tried to stand. She almost fell as she tried to stand, supporting herself on the footboard of the bed. She wondered how long she had lain unconscious and winced as the blood flowing into her feet began to cause an intense pins and needles stabbing throughout her lower body. There was another horrible realization as she saw the tube running from beneath her gown, and she felt the solid discomfort of the catheter within her urethra. "Oh, Jesus Christ, no," she said as she stared at the device with disgust. "What can I do about that?" It was now too late. A nurse entered and switched on the light and gazed at her with shock. The woman seemed speechless, but immediately rushed to her side and began to try and gently move her back into the bed. As another nurse, a young man, appeared in the door, she quickly ordered him to call the doctor. "Just lay back down, miss. You shouldn't be moving around just yet." "Shit," said the voice in Elise's head. "We're going to have to play along. You'll have to get them to remove that damn thing from your cunt anyway." Elise winced at the word, which she had abhorred her entire life. Can you remove this catheter, please?" Elise begged as she laid back down. "Oh, of course, dear. All in good time, but you'll have to see the doctor first. Please, it's really uncomfortable." Elise looked into the woman's bright green eyes and looked as desperate and as pitiful as she could. "Okay, dear. Just lay back and I'll do what I can." Elise stared at the ceiling as the woman raised her gown and began to carefully work at the device. She felt a horrid sore rawness as the tube withdrew, and she immediately felt as if she had to urinate. "May I go to the restroom?" she asked pleadingly. The woman looked frustrated as she put down the device. "You shouldn't get up," she answered calmly. "I can get you a bedpan. Please, I just want to use the toilet. You can help me if you like." The woman shook her head disapprovingly as she looked to the door as if hoping the doctor would appear. "Okay," she said, exasperated, as she helped Elise to her feet. With her second attempt at standing, she felt stronger, but her body was stiff and aching as she leaned heavily on the nurse's thin shoulders. Now in the nurse's embrace, she suddenly felt sudden electric warmth spreading through her extremities. For a moment, the woman became rigid, and she looked up into Elise's eyes with shock. Elise felt strength coursing through her body as the woman began to waver and then slumped down onto the floor, almost dragging Elise with her. "How did you do that?" Elise whispered to the presence in her mind. "I didn't. You did," the voice returned. "I just showed you how. Now look in her pockets and see if you can find any keys or anything." Elise reluctantly did as she was told, stopping only to assure herself that the kind nurse was still breathing. By all appearances, she was only in a deep, restful slumber. In the front of her scrub coat, Elise found a set of keys. "What do I do now?" "Just leave the room for a start," the voice rasped sharply. Elise walked across the room silently and peered out into the hall. She could see a desk at the end of the corridor where the male nurse appeared to be on the phone, waiting expectantly for someone to answer. "Which way?" Elise asked. "Go to the left and turn down that hallway there, and you will come to an exit which leads into the parking lot." Elise padded barefoot down the hall, and just as the voice had foretold, she saw an exit sign over the glass doors of a waiting room. She hurriedly made her way outside and into the cold night air. The concrete was biting against the bottoms of her feet as she surveyed the 7 cars which sat empty and dark in the security lights. "Which one is hers?" she said as she sorted through the keychain until she came to one with a large plastic grip over the end. She studied the emblem and saw a Toyota symbol. "Never mind, I think I know." She made her way to a Cressida, which was parked nearby. Unlocking the door, she got in and looked around. Seeing the baby seat in the back, she hung her head with guilt. "She's a bloody mom," she said to the presence. "Yes, and it will be a much safer world for her child if we are successful," the voice angrily rasped. Elise tried to understand what was happening as she slid the keys into the ignition. "What do you mean, the world will be safer?" she said as she carefully backed out of the parking spot, mindful of how awkward she felt trying to drive from the left side of the car. "What I mean is that the place you were in when I found you could be a very plausible reality if we do not take action to prevent it. By the way, you are driving on the wrong side of the road." "Shit!" Elise immediately corrected herself and concentrated as she drove down the narrow back street of an unfamiliar urban neighborhood. "Bloody Americans do everything backwards," she whispered as she tried to identify some recognizable landmark. "I don't understand any of this. What did I do to that nurse?" "What you probably should have been doing all along, borrowing energy. Stealing energy, more like it. She'll recover it quickly enough." Elise sighed with relief that she had done no permanent damage to the poor woman. Despite her confusion and guilt, she had realized that she felt better now than she had in years, both physically and psychologically. "What do you mean I should have been doing that all along?" "Turn here," the voice said as Elise felt an impulse to merge onto an overpass, which would take her out of what she now surmised to be a small suburb. "What I mean is that even though you may not have realized it, you've been in a very peculiar state for quite a while, I'm guessing." "I've been clinically depressed since I was shot a few years back, if that's what you mean." "No, my dear. You've been physically and spiritually undernourished ever since you died a few years back." Elise swerved off onto the shoulder of the road with shock before she quickly regained control. "That's crazy. I didn't die." "Oh, you died all right. You wouldn't even have been able to talk to me if you hadn't. From what I can tell, you haven't a psychic hair on your pretty little head. But I was able to get into your unconscious like I was walking into a supermarket. I've had experiences with a very similar spell, but you're the first I've seen that was actually tied back to your own body. You must have caught you right before you discorporated." "Who caught me?" Elise asked, as she already began to think of the answer. "Your boyfriend, the necromancer." "Charlie? Charlie wasn't a necromancer, he was a dark worker." "Everyone needs a day job." The presence laughed at its own joke. "He most likely didn't have a clue what he was doing. He probably just wanted to save you, and the fly used it. It was a window to get into his mind." "What are you talking about? What fly? Who are you?" Elise was remembering the image of the woman from the dream and was finding the face she saw in her recollection eerily familiar. "I'll explain on the way." "Where are we going?" "Point Pleasant, West Virginia." "I've got to pull over." "We don't have time. We'll have to make time. I really do have to pee." Elise emerged from the tall grass and approached the car. She looked down at herself and realized that she would be easily spotted very soon, still wearing the hospital gown. First, looking through the back seat, she found a purse tucked underneath the seat with 3 folded $20 bills in a side pocket. On the other side of the baby's seat, shame still welling within her, she found a gym bag with a pair of sweatpants, some tennis shoes, and a sweatshirt. She hastily dressed in the darkness before returning to the driver's seat and resuming her journey. "I know you from somewhere. I mean, I recognize you from the dream vision thing. Do you read poetry? Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Wait a minute. You were famous or something. Strauss! Your name is Strauss. Very good. I'm impressed. Oh my god. You were brilliant. Or you are brilliant. Something like that. You killed yourself. Elise stopped suddenly as she realized what she had said. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... It's strange to hear someone say that after all these years, just to tell me that I ended my own life. It sounds so trivial and matter of fact. I wonder sometimes if I would have been as well known if I hadn't been a suicide. It's such a strange thing to realize that you will forever be remembered for the greatest crime you ever committed. I think I would gladly trade the folly of having every word I ever wrote forever tainted by my own self-destruction for obscurity now. I wrote about so many things. Love, my children, dreams, hopes, and fantasies. Now every word is put in comparison against my greatest darkness and drips with sorrow. My entire mortal lifetime is seen through the lens of my last action, and that lens is stained black with the killing of myself, and now quite possibly my children. I'm very sorry. Just tell me what I have to do to help. Our goals are joined. Yours to save your husband, and mine to save my daughter. Ironically, they are half-brother and half-sister. Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that Charlie is somehow related to you? The man you call Charlie is the son of my husband, Emmerich Drescher. No, that's crazy. How could that be possible? But wait, your son was Eric Drescher, the singer. I always told Charlie they looked just alike. That means that Charlie was Eric Drescher's half-brother too. All these years we were listening to music written by his brother. This is bloody amazing. But you're also talking about your daughter. That's Karina Drescher, the supermodel, right? She's involved in all this too. But how do you know about me and Charlie? How did you find us? This will make no sense to you until after I explain the rest. But I realized that Emmerich's lost son must be involved when I discovered that it was not Emmerich who was after Karina. I remembered the Irish girl who he had had an affair with in England, and I remembered that her name was McDonough. As a spirit, I gather information very quickly if I am in a state of clarity by traveling great distances in a very short amount of time. Both you and your husband are marked by the energy of the entity I call the Fly. If you could see the world as I do, you would realize that such energy radiates like a beacon in the in-between state where I exist. I did not know your story until after I found you catatonic at the nursing home. And when I found that you were open, I entered your personal sphere of consciousness, and there I saw the events which have unfolded in your life over the past few years. But first, let me begin by telling you about Charlie's father, Emmerich Drescher, the Necromancer. And you expect us to believe that? Russell said as he stared blankly at Diedrich after the conclusion of his tale. He had not found it quite so easy to convince the two retired coal miners of his explanation as it were the three local girls. It does make sense, I guess, Mitch said, scratching his head. Yeah, in a crazy lunatic kind of way, Russell agreed dubiously. But we saw that thing, Russ, Mitch rationalized. We saw the walking corpses in the woods. We heard everything that Drescher woman said in the truck. So if his story is crazy, then we are too. I know that, Russell said with frustration. It doesn't even really matter, because we're going to help anyway, right? Mitch raised his eyebrows with resignation and nodded his consent. So, what's the plan then there, Sherlock? Before Diedrich had time to admit that he truly did not have a clue what to do next, there was a ruckus from the front of the station. He heard raised shouts and recognized the voice of Luann immediately as she yelled, "Give me a break, Roscoe! You've known us since grade school!" "Be that as it may, Luann, I cannot allow you into the holding area," the deputy replied defiantly. Russell, Mitch, and Diedrich arose and made their way to the front, where Russell's son was holding the 3 enraged women at bay. "Deputy," Diedrich cut in. And in seconds, the man's righteous devotion was calmed, and he sat down silently at his desk, like an obedient hunting dog. Russell looked at Mitch with wonder and whispered, "I wonder if he could show me how to do that." "What word have you from the hospital?" Diedrich said to the approaching girls. "Well, we have 2 words, D. Holy shit," Luann said without humor. "It's her goddamn necklace," Marianne explained. "She's got some kind of stone on a chain, and I'll bet good money that it is possessing her or something." "A stone, you say? Like a small piece of quartz, perhaps?" He made a circle with his fingers to indicate the size. "Yeah. You've seen it?" "No. But after talking to these 2 gentlemen, I have a much better idea what is going on." "So what do? Get the stone away from her?" Janelle said, biting her lip with concern. "I'm not so sure that would be as beneficial to Karina as we might think. If what I have been told is correct, then her father's spirit has been acting to protect her from this thing, which seems to be hunting her." "Is she safe at the hospital?" Marianne said as she gazed out the window at the sudden rush of snowflakes which appeared to be lashing against the glass. "I actually don't know if she is truly safe anywhere," Diedrich answered as he began pacing around the deputy's desk. "I am beginning to think that the only alternative available to us is to attempt a confrontation with this entity." "Yeah, I got a couple issues with that." Luann looked at everyone with wide, frightened eyes. "Even if we can fight that thing, we'd have to find it first." "That's not really a problem," answered Janelle. "We all saw the photos. It's taken over the TNT bunkers." "Yeah, we saw the photos, all right, and the bunkers are filled with zombies." Marianne turned and looked at the others as if they were losing their minds. "Not anymore," Luann interjected. "They were wheeling the corpses in from the woods into the hospital as we were leaving." "Wait," Diedrich interrupted as his face went pale. "They brought the bodies from the woods into the hospital?" "Yeah, looked like over a dozen or so." Diedrich's blood ran as cold as frozen river water. "But you said you only shot a few," he said to Mitch. "That's right, 4 or 5 at the most." Mitch studied the German man's face as he began to realize what he was thinking. "So that means that when they got out there, all of them were laying still. The last call I got said that they'd recovered over 20 from the bunkers out in the woods," the deputy offered quietly. "I think we need to get back to the hospital." Diedrich started towards the door as Russell nudged his son's shoulder and opened his palm. "I'll be needing the keys to my truck and our guns," he said sternly. "Now, Dad, you know I can't do that." "Give him what he asks," Diedrich commanded, and the deputy promptly and silently opened the drawer of his desk and placed the keys into his father's waiting hand before going to the gun safe for the weapons. God damn, that's a good trick, Mitch said, whistling with wonder. Where were you when he dropped out of college? As the evening shift changed over into the night shift, Myrna met Deborah Ann at the desk and showed her the night's registry. The evening nurses were hurriedly clocking out in order to get back to their homes before the snowfall became impassable. Twice throughout the winter they had been snowed in until plows could clear the parking lot, and no one wanted to be stranded again. As Myrna put on her coat, she stopped at the instant coffee machine and filled her travel mug with murky brown-colored liquid, which she still had the remnants of several dehydrated coffee crystals floating within. As she made her way to the front entrance, she saw a young girl entering from the blurred white wall of snow outside, dressed only in gray sweat clothes. As she drew nearer, Myrna noticed the girl's face was as pale white as the ground outside, and she would have asked if she required assistance if it were not for the brisk, determined energy of her walk. As they passed, Myrna smiled a silent greeting, but was suddenly met with a wave of fatigue and dizziness as her gaze locked into the woman's dark, bottomless eyes. The girl stopped and said in a sweet voice with a thick, foreign accent, "Are you all right, ma'am?" The woman reached forward and gently touched her arm, and suddenly Myrna was filled with a sleepy sense of well-being. All nervousness she had about driving the snow was gone, and for all purposes, she felt as if she had just taken a strong tranquilizer. The girl pulled away, as if she had just thought of something disturbing, and then apologizing, walked off towards the reception desk. Myrna shook her head as she reminded herself that she hadn't slept well the night before, and must be finally paying the price. On her way through the automatic glass doors, she noticed a collection of flies buzzing at the top of the frame, and wondered how they could be out in the middle of the winter. The lieutenant gazed out over the numerous tables as he slid another cadaver into the vault and closed the door. He had worked tirelessly all throughout the afternoon, but knew that his work was far from at an end. Agent Jason Cannell, forensic specialist for the FBI, had been called in upon the recovery of the missing persons. As soon as he was presented with the first report earlier that day, already the case had seemed bizarre, but it wasn't until he had begun the first preliminary examination of the bodies that the true absurdity of the situation had become apparent. It was then that he had realized that the case did in fact bear a striking resemblance to the events described to him by a colleague concerning another missing persons case in Europe. The full details had been vague, as it was evident that the English and German police forces were reluctant to divulge any information other than that the bodies had been found. However, details had been leaked that indicated an oddity which Lieutenant Cannell was seeing mirrored in his own new assignment. At least upon his basic examination, it seemed that the bodies of those people which had been found in the woods had in fact been deceased for a number of days beyond which seemed reasonable. Even given the cold weather, it would have been almost impossible for the victims to have made their way into the woods unless they had been taken and dropped there after an extended period by an unknown person. Yet the two hunters who had first appeared at the occurrence had stated firmly that these people had been actively moving upon their encounter the day before. Jason walked over to the corpse, which lay bluish-white and still upon the exam table, and leaning over carefully, pulled the jaw down to look into the mouth. This particular body had been that of a cable line repairman who had disappeared from a routine call some 3 weeks previous in Ohio. Taking the penlight from his lab coat, he shone the light into the open graying orifice and stared down into the cadaver's throat. There, he could clearly see the presence of several rice green-like objects moving passively within the flesh of the tonsils. Maggots, he thought with wonder. It's impossible this time of the year. Was it plausible that the bodies had somehow been stored in a warmer locale and then brought here within the past few days? Suddenly hearing a noise behind him, Jason shot up and whirled to find his partner standing at the door with 2 styrofoam cups of coffee in hand. "Jesus, Jason!" Beverly Singer exclaimed, laughing. Her short brown hair hung over her eyes rakishly as she placed the cups on the counter and approached the table. "I think you need to call it a quit for the night. You've been down here for over 6 hours straight. There are maggots in his throat, Bev, he answered as he gestured for her to look. That's strange, she whispered as she backed away and looked at the cold, pale body with uneasy curiosity. Did you ever get anything out of the supermodel? Ex-supermodel. She's been a photographer for quite a while now, and no, she doesn't remember anything. This just doesn't make any sense, he said, as he turned the corpse's head to the side and revealed the large open wound, which exposed a grisly mass of brain matter. This gunshot matches the rifles used by the two old-timers, but by all indications, it was not the cause of death. This guy has been dead for somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. He's got marked decomposition that has been slowed by the cold, but he's definitely been dead a long time. Unless those two hunters just walked up and shot a corpse, there has got to be more to this than we know. Well, when I interviewed those two, they were fairly clear on what happened. Could they be suffering from some kind of dementia or something? They're old, but they're very rational, Jason. Those guys are war vets, and they saw a lot of action, apparently. I mean, anything is possible, but if they were lying, then I couldn't tell. And I thought Tim was full of shit when he told me about the case in England. Well, if the Brits have information that could help, it'd be like pulling teeth to get them to talk. What the hell am I supposed to put in the report? Bodies dead for weeks, re-killed by hunters. Just wait until we've examined the others, and we'll see if anything turns up. Right now, you need to lock this guy up so we can get out of here. There's another blizzard brewing outside. Oh, yeah, right. Like, I'm going to let us get snowed in at that hotel and not be able to get back tomorrow. We're staying here tonight, Bev. I had a feeling you were going to say that. Okay, I'm going to catch some sleep in the waiting room. Wake me up if you find anything. Sure thing. Jason watched as she left and immediately wished she hadn't. The prospect of spending the night alone in the morgue did not strike him as amusing in the least. He walked to the counter and turned on the radio and listened as the announcer warned against any road travel as conditions were steadily worsening before Hank Williams Jr. began to sing about how country boys can survive. He watched. He saw a single fly buzz across the room and land on the lips of the cadaver. Son of a bitch, he said as he sipped his coffee. Deborah sat staring at the computer monitor with her hands resting on the keyboard motionlessly. She studied her nails and contemplated digging her nail file from her purse and going to work on a particularly jagged thumbnail. She was deeply regretting not calling in as she studied the white fury of snow which was mounting against the front doors. The plows will be out by morning, she thought in a weak attempt to comfort herself. She stared at the pile of admissions that Myrna had left for her and quietly cursed her evening shift counterpart just as a small, dark girl approached the desk. Hello? I need to see Karina Drescher, please. The girl was obviously foreign and in need of a shower. Her black hair was greasy and lank over a pale, round face that was so deathly white that Deborah wondered if she wasn't on drugs. Visiting hours have been over for a long time, sweetie. Deborah could not mask her irritation, but something about the girl's deadpan expression and blank, staring dark eyes was making her uncomfortable. It's very important, the girl said calmly, as she placed one small hand with only a single wedding band as jewelry on the desk. Honey, I don't know how they do things where you're from, but around here we close up shop long before midnight. Deborah tried to smile, but the girl's eyes seemed to be reaching into her with an icy cold she could not tolerate. You're gonna have to go. But it's snowing so hard. Can't I just sit over there on the couch and wait? There was something innocent and pleading about the girl's tone, which offset the odd nature of her demeanor. Rilla dear, You should have thought about that before you came out. Deborah was patting her hair in an attempt at cool dismissal, but her hands had begun to tremble as the girl leaned over the desk. I'll go then, but I was wondering if you might have a fag. The girl smiled sweetly, and Deborah thought she would do anything at that point to be rid of the stranger. Deborah reached into her purse and found a pack from which she withdrew a single long white cigarette. She congratulated herself that she remembered that fag was British slang for a smoke. She held it out carefully and almost jerked with shock when the girl's cold fingers brushed her hand. She did try to pull back, but the instant the girl's hand closed over her own, her vision suddenly darkened as she slumped forward unconscious. "I'm really very sorry," Elise said, as she laid the cigarette down by the woman's hand. Elisa began to walk away from the desk when she felt the cold blast of air hit her from behind. She turned and saw the door slide open as a dark figure walked in with snow still clinging to his heavy parka. She could not see his face beneath the fur-lined hood which was pulled over his head, but something seemed eerily familiar about the way the man carried himself across the lobby. She froze and waited as she began to detect a horrible smell like rotted meat and soured earth radiating from the person like a cloud. "It's him," Petra's voice called in her mind, and she had no need to ask of whom she was referring. It was Charlie. As he approached, she could see the bottom part of his face beneath the hood, and she saw that stubble of blonde and black hair grew over his chin. His lips were pale and bloodless as he stood before her, eyes concealed, as if waiting for her to speak. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, as tears threatened to blur the vision of her lost husband. "I do," he answered, his voice a low whisper. "I wanted to see you for so long," he said with a distant thoughtfulness as if speaking to himself. "Is it you? Are you really here?" She was crying now and wanted to embrace him, but the fear of the odor and what it meant kept her at arm's length. "In a way," he said quietly, "it will let me speak to you, but only because it wants things to go as planned." "And what is the plan, Charlie?" "We're going to go talk to my father," he replied. "It wants everything to go very quietly. I'm glad that you put that woman to sleep. I fear that it would have made me kill her. I guess it wouldn't matter. There have been so many now." "But why, Charlie? What does it want?" She was wiping the tears from her face as Charlie raised his head, and she saw the familiar gray eyes staring at her as if from across a vast abyss. "Something is coming on the horizon," he said, as if uttering a prophecy. "It has shown me so many things. This world is going to fall, and it wants to be ready. It's making its bid for power before another may strike. It doesn't really want me. It never did. It wanted one like my father, but he had a power of his own which held this thing in check. It wants to take me and my sister so that it can produce one like my father, which it can control. It says that there is one coming, a man from Germany that it calls an exorcist. All will be well if I leave here with my sister. But if my father resists, then there will be a confrontation. You cannot imagine the nightmare it will unleash, Elise." "But Charlie, if it does have this child, then what will happen?" "The child will be an avatar for the fly. There have been others like it in other worlds. Ever since the fly was released long ago from captivity, it has sought one to allow it to rise to its full potential. It will be able to recreate reality and distort the fabric of this universe. There are many like the fly now, which are racing against the one which comes. I cannot stop it. It has enslaved me to its will. It gave me what life I had, and it saved you. I do not think that I even truly live now. Can't you fight it? She wanted to take his hands in her own, but staring down, she saw the cold gray skin of his fingers and the rough black hairs which rose from the back of his knuckles. I can do nothing. I'm a slave, a vessel. I have none of the power which it desires. Only just enough of my father's blood so that it may use me. Even now this form is weakening, and the thing which I have become threatens to rise forth. It has no pity, no emotion, and no remorse. It is only its own purpose, and that purpose is to breed more of the decay and horror on which it feeds. Life feeds on life, life feeds on death, and the fly is death that feeds on life. Elise broke into sobs as her legs threatened to drop her to the floor. Then it's over. There is no hope. It will have its way no matter what. Please don't say that. It has been beaten before. I have seen it. In other worlds, it was imprisoned and cast out. Charlie had said too much, and a look of agony passed over his face as if he had been stabbed from within. Still, he fought. There was a cave, and in the ancient times there were shamans who imprisoned it, and others within. It was set free by accident, and the pain had taken him. And then, as if he had been subdued, his face relaxed back into the cold, impassive mask. We must go to the Drescher woman now and speak with Father. No, I can't let you. She said every word, a trial of sorrow and loss. You cannot stop it. He began to move forward, and then Elise reached out and embraced him. She pulled him close and fought to draw out whatever remnant might be left of the man she loved. He froze rigid in her arms as the cold electric energy began to pass between them. This time, however, it would be she who would be drained. No, Charlie said, as he felt the fragile energy which bound Elise to life break like a thin glass seal as the fly took back its charm, and she slumped down to the floor, lifeless and cold. Charlie looked down, and with every remaining wisp of humanity which still clung to the ruin of his soul, he longed to fall to her and hold her. But the fly offered no such amenities. The elevator at the end of the lobby opened as an older doctor who was speaking with an elderly walked out and saw the scene. He rushed across the floor and knelt beside the fallen woman as the orderly crossed between the desk and checked Deborah Ann quickly before calling for aid to the first floor lobby over the intercom. The doctor was calling out to the strange hooded man as he entered the elevator before the doors closed behind him. A security guard was waiting at the second floor as the doors opened. When he saw the man inside, he called for him to move to the floor, but was silenced as a cold iron grip clasped his throat and lifted him from his feet. He stood gasping and choking as he watched the mouth beneath the hood of the parka open and a black cloud of flies burst forth and enter his own lips. The man dropped the guard to the floor and walked away as the guard gripped his stomach and seized violently with the intense burning pain within his chest and abdomen. The night shift nurses, who sat at the nearby nurses' station, screamed in panic and fled down the hallway as the figure approached. The lights overhead began to flicker erratically as the figure passed beneath them. Beverly was awakened by the crackling of the fluorescent bulbs as they flashed on and off. Great. The power's going out, she thought wearily, as she sat up stiffly from the waiting room couch. She looked at her watch and saw that it was almost 12:30. She had dozed for nearly an hour. She stood and walked back down the hallway until she came to the door of the morgue. She went inside and was forced to try and assess the scene in the strobe-like flashes as the lights flickered incessantly. She stopped cold, with the door latch still gripped tightly in her hands as she tried to process the bits of information she was witnessing in between the flashes. She struggled with disbelief as her rational mind argued with the reality of what her eyes were describing. The tables were empty. Several of the metal doors to the morgue compartments were hanging open. There was only one corpse left in the room, lying torn and gutted on the cold steel table. It was Jason. There were flies everywhere. They buzzed around her eyes and face, trying to intrude into her nostrils and ears. The lights were flashing. There were pale shapes moving on the walls and ceiling. The cadavers were moving. They were crawling along the floor, misshapen and disjointed like insects. They were coming towards her, quickly, with unnatural speed. She slammed the door and ran in terror. She heard the door slam open behind her as she fled, and the terrifying sound of bare skin slapping against the tile as the dead began to follow. She fell against the elevator breathless as she began pounding the button, but the device would not respond. She closed her eyes and tried to tell herself that this was a nightmare, and that soon she would awaken on the waiting room couch. She could hear shuffling and dragging sounds behind her as more flies tried to crawl into her ears. She turned and drew her revolver and opened her eyes, staring at the assembled, crawling host, which was fast approaching on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling, naked, deformed corpses, dead bodies coming closer with open gray mouths and blank staring eyes covered in maggots and flies like animal carcasses, laying in the road, moving and hungry as they came closer. She opened fire, but they could not be stopped. She closed her eyes and screamed as they fell upon her, reaching and starving, tearing, grasping, and biting. Mitch, Russell, and Clement rode in the large pickup, and Diedrich followed with the girls and Marianne's Mustang. The snowfall was now so dense that the wipers of both vehicles were becoming laden with ice as they made their way through town to the hospital. It soon became apparent to Diedrich that the car was not going to finish the journey. Its tires spun continuously, and several times already they had almost been trapped in the building drifts, which had eradicated all signs of the road. Marianne squinted and leaned forward with her chin almost resting on the steering wheel as she tried to gauge distance by landmarks which could no longer be seen. Even the buildings on the main street seemed but vague gray outlines in the darkness. Soon she was concentrating on the lights of the pickup as her only means of navigation. All of a sudden, the three passengers felt the car suddenly begin to slide uncontrollably as Marianne pressed down on the brakes. The vehicle slid sideways and began an easy glide towards the back bumper of the pickup, stopping just short of a collision. "What the fuck, Marianne?" Luann shouted from the back seat. "They stopped!" she explained as she watched the doors of the truck open and the three men get out. Marianne rolled down her window, snow pelting her face, as Russell approached, rifle in hand. "We're going to have to hook from here," he explained as he pointed to the road ahead. "The road is buried, and there is no way we're getting through." "Great, another 3 blocks in a blizzard," Leanne moaned with agitation as she zipped her coat and pulled her black knitted stocking cap over her ears. "You would think God would cut us a break, us being out to fight evil and all." "I wish it was so," Diedrich said as he got out and felt the seat fold down to help the two in the back out. "But this snow has been the bane of my existence for over 2 months now. I am beginning to think that this storm followed me from Germany." Making their way through the snow proved no easy task, and within minutes the entire group was breathing hard as they struggled through the solid foot of collected powder around their ankles. In summer, the journey would have been a brisk walk, but now they found themselves marching against the relentless wind and ice in a marathon of cold, fatigue, and misery. Eventually, Mitch pointed to a street sign, and they knew that their goal was ahead. It was then that they saw the first of the shadows, moving behind the buried cars at the side of the street. Clement stepped forward and called out over the wind, which blew the snow in patterns and waves over the field of cold white. "You shouldn't be out in the streets. Are you lost?" The girls were huddling together as they saw more of the forms appearing from an alley and began to move towards them. Mitch and Russell gave each other knowing looks as they removed the safety from their firearms and pulled off their gloves with their teeth to ready their hands for firing. "Better get back, Clement," Russell shouted. "I already count 6, and there is more coming." The deputy gave an irritated glance over his shoulder as he took another step forward and cupped his hands over his mouth. "You should all be inside. It is very dangerous out here." "Better listen to your dad, Roscoe," Janelle said, pulling his arm forcibly. "Look, y'all may have bought into all this voodoo nonsense, but I am still a man of the law. There might be a bunch of drunks just getting out from the bar and not realized how bad it is out here." Clement watched with shock as one of the figures shot up from the snow like a missile and landed on the roof of a parked Jeep. He could see in the light of the street lamp that it was a woman. She was crouching now, poised like some panther ready to strike. He fought to see her face, and as the wind blew her long blonde hair back, he caught a glimpse of a sunken, hollow visage without eyes in its empty, dark sockets. What the hell? She jumped through the air and landed in mid-run as the others joined like wolves pouncing on a wounded bison. Their speed was incredible as they bounded through the snow, sometimes running and other times leaping, animal-like and determined with fury. "They're moving like the ones we saw out in the woods," Mitch called out to Diedrich as he put his gun to his shoulder. Diedrich looked at the stunned deputy who appeared on the verge of trying to negotiate again. With all his will, he concentrated on Clement and yelled, "Deputy, they are dead, and they are going to try and kill us. You have no choice. It is your duty as an officer to protect these girls. These things are our enemies." A strange look of realization dawned on Clement's rough features. Suddenly, as if an alarm had went off in his brain, he seized his revolver from its holster and with blind, calm fury began firing at the attacking host. They watched as bullet hole appeared in the forehead of the lead female, and she dropped twitching into the white. 3 others fell back as the .44 shells blasted through their skulls. Russell looked at Mitch and smiled with pride. He always was a good shot. Diedrich pulled his own handgun and joined with the other men as they pelted the oncoming group with round after round of bullets. The 3 women had run to the truck where they rushed to arm themselves with rifles from the police station's armory. They began trudging their way backwards towards the hospital in a slow retreat as more of the creatures took to the street and attacked. Mitch was firing a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun, which seemed the most effective tool in dispersing the frenzied horde. Marianne, Janelle, and Luann were at first clumsy and awkward with their first few shots, but soon fell into a synchronized pattern of firing and running as they saw the parking lot of the hospital ahead. "And I used to complain when my dad took me hunting," Marianne exclaimed over the constant, echoing crack of gunfire. Now, with the doors of the hospital entrance in sight, they broke into a solid run, stumbling through the drifts until they reached the brick pillars of the entrance. Once inside, they saw that the hospital was in chaos. Nurses and orderlies were running in terror as the lights flickered spastically. There were security guards rushing to the service stairs as screams were heard down the hallway. An older doctor rushed from the reception desk and stood shaking and pale before the group. "Oh, thank God," he said, putting his hands on Clement's shoulders. "There's someone in the hospital. Something's gone terribly wrong." Clement tried to calm the terrified man, and that was when Diedrich saw her. She stood by the open doors of the stairwell, just as he had seen her last. Her black dress draped over her slender body as she gestured for him to follow. Diedrich bolted, and the others followed. As he climbed the stairs, Diedrich could feel the dark energy amassing around him, like a building pressure within the walls. They had only made it up half of the flight when they saw the mangled, bleeding bodies of the security guards laying in heaps on the upper landing. Dietrich looked around but could not see the attacker. It was then he heard the fleshy, sluggish movements above, and he looked up. There were cadavers crawling over the ceiling. One of them dropped down onto him. In a hissing, clawing mass of dead flesh, he could see rotted teeth and a face spotted with patches of maggots as it bit and snapped at his throat. He tried to push it back and managed to raise his right arm enough to plant his hand across its head and thrust it away. He looked into the lifeless, bleached eyes, and then, as if all other emotion was novelty, a new feeling arose in his chest. He felt a fury and a desperation merge as an energy began to course through his body. The power was growing, and then in one brief second, as if a switch had been thrown, there came a burst which issued out from his hand. The others watched the struggle and fell back as the pulse went out from the German like a depth charge igniting in the ocean floor. The cadaver was thrown against the wall as the other two dropped from their stance and fell, unmoving and silent, onto the stairs. They stood quiet and stunned as Dietrich fell limp and weary against the wall. "Why didn't you just do that outside?" Luann said with disbelieving eyes. "I didn't know that I could." It had been Karina who had fallen asleep before the commotion had begun, but it was Emmerich who had awakened. It was Emmerich's eyes that watched, shining in the darkness from the hospital bed as the figure entered the room. It was Emmerich who detected the familiar odor of ending and decay which hovered around the stranger. He knew the scent as well as he knew the familiar buzzing which filled the air. He had contemplated an escape, but he was all too aware of the storm which was raging outside the night. He knew that in her current condition, Karina would be as good as dead if he were to subject her to the elements once again. So he had watched and waited, and now, seeing the wretched shadow of a human standing in the doorway, he also knew that this game was over. "Hello," he said to the silent figure. "I believe we have never met, but I am your father, if you choose to believe it. I do not think I ever learned your name." "My name was Charles McDonald. I have no name now." "That is unfortunate," Emmerich sighed wistfully. "Not that it would have mattered had we met anyway. It seems that I have done the offspring which I knew little good." "What would you have done if you had known me?" the figure said, as it stepped forward. Emmerich watched as it pulled back its large hood and revealed a face so much like his own in his youth that it almost shocked him. "To be honest, I am not sure. I was not overly fond of your mother, but she was a very intelligent, if somewhat erratic, personality." "You did not love her then?" "I believe the answer to that would be obvious, but I found very early in life that I was incapable of love. At least love, as you would think of it, romantic love you might call it. But I have always cared for my children. If I had known that she had chosen not to terminate her pregnancy, I might have chosen to at least meet with you. I may have even tried to offer you some financial support." That's very honorable of you." The voice was low and without emotion. It did not mock or self-sympathize. "It would have been nothing of the sort. But you were of my blood. It seems that something of my upbringing implanted a need to care for my offspring. I watched my mother struggle in poverty, fighting every day to protect us. Of all the things I was and am, I refused to let myself truly, completely abandon my children. It is a shame that you were kept from me. Were you cared for? I had grandparents who raised me. They were very loving. Ah, well then, you are probably better off. My blood is like poison. Through my dealings with this horror, I have ruined everything that was normal and beautiful that life ever gave me. You did not even know my name, and yet it found you. Yes, it did. And now it wants your daughter. I am well aware of that. But I feel that I will not allow that to occur. How do you plan to stop it? What you see before you resting within poor Karina is but a shadow of what I was. And yet I held that abomination and its nightmares at bay. What makes you think I cannot continue? She's weak, and it is her energy which you have used. That is true, but you are here as well. No, I am not. I am a puppet for this god of yours. I cannot resist it. Are you sure, Charles? Or is it Charlie? I guess that you never were privy to my gifts. But could you never see the dead? No, the figure said, as it moved to the foot of the bed. Then I take it you cannot see the lovely young girl spirit which stands at your side. I hear her saying that her name is Elise. Charlie froze and looked to its side, but saw nothing in the dark room. Do you doubt me? She is probably around 5'3", with long dark hair and large brown eyes. She is waiting for you. Waiting for me to what? Emmerich could hear a trace of emotion emerging in the man's voice. To fight and be free. To resist this thing. And go with her wherever spirits may roam. I cannot. I cannot fight it. I think you should try. You never know what you are capable of. Emmerich launched up from the bed, and clutching the amulet around Karina's neck in one hand, he held out the other and projected a wall of force which slammed Charlie to the wall. I will never allow this thing to destroy my daughter with its evil. I will kill her first. Emmerich began chanting as the room began to fill with a cold static charge. Charlie's features began twisting and contorting as the horrid creature began to re-emerge through his body. Bones cracked and splintered as his flesh writhed within the winter coat. You will never, my God, you grotesque piece of rotted filth. I have only one God, and that is me. He launched another burst of force, which quickened Charlie's transformation as limbs began to grow out from his bones, and his face began to split from the bottom of his nose down to his chin. What is your plan, old man? A new voice, mocked alien and inhuman from within the transfiguring nightmare. Will you hold me until the exorcist arrives? Even now he is besieged by the dead. Your battle is lost. You have only chosen more pain for your sickening children. Emmerich watched with strange fascination as the new appendages began to fight from within the parka like a moth tearing at its cocoon. What has it done to you, my son? He whispered as he heard Charlie's spine crack and the fabric of his clothing tear. As he had throughout his life, Emmerich began to to see through the veil of the present superficial world, to witness the awful stasis of transmutation which was being inflicted onto his lost son. Charlie had become a gate, but he was a closed door at which the fly was pressing. A child of Charlie and Karina's would be an open portal, and through it would be born an avatar. Emmerich fought with every ounce of control he could muster against the creature, but he could sense Karina's failing strength. The game was finally at its close. He had spent a lifetime toying with a force which bridged life and death with its unnatural energy, and now the price must be paid. It was then he felt the pulse. From somewhere below, a wave of energy was building like a bubble, growing from its epicenter to expand out into the reaches of the hospital. It passed through the room like a moving wall which hit the fly and Emmerich both as a pulverizing psychic blast. For a moment it seemed the creature was suspended as Karina's body was lifted in brief weightlessness from the bed. Emmerich sighed in strange tranquility as he felt his hold on Karina dissolve and his own spirit cast out as the small amulet of course exploded into dust. Emmerich laughed as he was thrown into an endless oblivion of images and recollection. He saw this world of bitter darkness and knew that at last the afterlife had come to claim him. So it is true, he thought, as he spun endlessly in the void. An exorcist has come. The second floor was silent before the distant, hidden weeping of scattered hospital staff as they huddled in terror in rooms and utility closets. For many, the closeness of the horror which had almost ensnared them was as visible as the rotting corpses which were strewn over the floors in advanced decomposition only a few feet away. Diedrich ran from the staircase and looked to the girls, who pointed to an open recovery room down the hall. He wasted no time in running to the door, filled with terror at what he might find when he entered. There in the dark room lay Karina, slumped over the side of the bed as if she had been flung aside by the massive force. Crawling across the floor was a massive, disfigured mutation of human and insect qualities. It dragged itself as if injured as its huge, opaque wings rose and fell rhythmically with its breathing. It looked up, and Diedrich saw the eyes of a man gazing at him, lost and terrified from within the ruined body. The other stopped at the door as Marianne let forth a muffled scream and fell back into Russell's arms. Mitch began praying under his breath as he made the sign of the divinity over his chest. "So you have come," said a hollow and ancient voice from within the creature. Diedrich threw his gun to the side and leapt forward with sudden, vengeful rage. The creature reared up and launched from the floor as the two met and interlocked. The jaw of the creature split open as the long, repugnant proboscis reached down and hovered inches from Diedrich's face, vibrating with tension as it dripped onto his arm. Diedrich closed his eyes and let out a primal scream of fury and terror as he opened himself like a window to a raging storm and let the power of the fly flood his being. Deep within the dark, putrid stagnancy of the fly's inner realm, Charlie saw a light shining in the distant blackness. With all his might, he fought for that pinpoint as he swam through the mire and disease of death until he could hear a voice calling from the other side. So sweet, familiar, and distant, she was calling to him, begging him to fight for his freedom. Charlie clawed and scraped as he surged towards that light, desperate to be reborn, far away from the ebony pitch horror of the fly, and into the arms of Elise. And there at the door, just as he was about to break free, he felt the hold of the wretched thing as it tried to encompass him. It enfolded him and wrapped its black legs around him as it gnawed and ripped at his spirit to keep it imprisoned. And then, from the shadows came a voice. Go, son. And remember that at least in this, I was your father. The voice was Emmerich, and he was there in the darkness. He grabbed at the pursuer and wrenched him from Charlie as the two fell into the whirling, bottomless limbo which waited beneath. At last, Charlie broke free. Diedrich opened his eyes and watched as the fly began to submerge down into the flesh which it had inhabited. Diedrich drew and absorbed more and more of the energy, pulling the fly out of the body which it had corrupted. He could hear the sound of bones realigning and tissue now molten, reforming into their natural shape. In moments, he held the still and naked corpse of Charles McDonough in his arms. He fell to the floor and gasped as he felt the energy within him surging and fighting to take control of its new residence. If it could, it would take him and make him the vehicle of its destruction. He fell back and let the corpse fall as he crawled, coughing and shaking for the door. Sick with illness that made his withdrawal seem like a passing flu, his mind was filled with images of rotten filth, devouring disembowelments, ecstatic eviscerations, dismemberment, hunger, disease. He could feel thousands of tiny mouths nibbling within his chest and stomach as hordes of larvae burrowed deeper into soft pink tissue. The others were coming to him with desperate, helpless eyes as he pushed them away and dragged himself into the hallway where he began retching, his stomach cramped with insane worlds of searing pain. Out, he screamed in his mind. I must push it out. And he began heaving, mouthful after mouthful of brown hot bile onto the floor. And then from somewhere in the core of his abdomen, he felt it stir. It pulsated and throbbed as he screamed through the stabbing, burning horror in his throat. He crouched on his hands and knees and hit the cold tile with his bare fist as at last he stretched his jaws wide and saw the front segment of the giant maggot appear. With one final spasm, he expelled the creature and it fell to the floor with a wet, soft thud. He looked on in disgust and repellent terror as it squirmed before him, and then raising up slightly stared back at him with a mute, human face. Its eyes staring up at him filled with hatred and seething rage that would haunt his nightmares for the remainder of his days. And then as he watched, it began to dissolve like some garden snail on which had been poured harsh, crystalline salt. Diedrich fell. He lay motionless and shaking with empty cold as his eyes drifted over to the desk of the nurse's station. There he saw her. Petra stood calm and pensive, smoking a cigarette, as she slid down and wrapped her arms around her knees, looking just as she had in his bathroom in Berlin. She reached forward and he felt her hand stroking his hair gently. You did it, Herr Abendroth, she said quietly. You saved them all. He wanted to speak, but his mind was incapable of commanding his body. It is such a shame, me and you. We could have been together, I think. If fate were not so cruel, we might have loved each other. He wanted to tell her that he did love her now. But such is the joke which time plays on men and ghosts alike. I found a man worth loving long after I had spent a life loving a man who did not even deserve to be hated. So here I am, a sad spirit who will soon lose whatever lucidity it may still have, and the man who has done more for me in a few months than anyone did in my entire mortal life soon will not even be able to see me. She laughed. She inhaled and blew smoke from her nose. I should have lived, Diedrich. I should have never given up. I may have been an old woman when I met you, but at least I would have met you, yes? Or perhaps not. There were so many things I did not understand, and I lived my life by the flood of emotions which ascended and retreated like the tides. I could have just left him. I could have just taken the children and went to my sisters, but in all righteous betrayed fury, I forgot that I owed so much to those lovely little children whom I abandoned as much as Emmerich ever did. How could I leave them like that? I am as responsible for what has befallen them as that evil bastard. And that poor boy, Charlie, another casualty of Emmerich and mine's selfish destruction. Do you know what I told that girl as she stood on my doorstep, announcing her pregnancy to me? I told her that Emmerich did not love his true children, let alone some bastard he might have with a whore. And I laughed at her. I laughed at her as she began to cry. And when she left, I wept as well, when we could have cried together. And all of us, it's that bastard child who found love. Such a lovely girl she was, Elise. I can see her now with him. They are leaving this place, hand in hand. Dietrich watched with profound loss as her image began to fade into a soft, translucent dream. Her eyes grew pale as a dim white light shone from them. He reached out, his hand trembling and longing for one last touch. You cannot go, he called. I need you, Petra. You must stay. She reached out, and her fingers touched his. He felt only a slight cold chill as she leaned down and kissed his cheek. All the evil things must go away now, exorcist. And no matter what you may feel towards me, I am but another evil thing that must pass on. Go on and find a living girl, you fool, and be alive while you can. I foresee a long life still to come for you, Herr Abendroth. Stay away from the bottle, and use what you have learned to help others. I think it was what you were born to do. He watched as she faded away, and he felt a new pain aching in his chest. The hollow longing of loss now crushed him, and he wept as she vanished. Marianne knelt at his side as he curled into a ball and sobbed like a child. She put her hand on his shoulder and said, "Who are you talking to?" A ghost, mankind. Just a ghost. The three girls helped him to his feet, and he staggered back into the room and approached the bed, Karinally unmoving and silent as her chest rose and fell with the shallowest of breaths. "Is she going to be okay?" Janelle asked as she brushed Karina's hair, damp with cold sweat, back from her face. I do not know. Is that thing gone? For good? Luann asked, sitting down on the side of the bed. I do not know that either. What will we do if it comes back? Marianne whispered. I will leave you my number, he said as he turned and walked from the room. In the hallway, two old hunters stood side by side, gazing at him with strange wonder. I guess we owe you a thanks, Russell said as he extended his hand. Dietrich accepted the gnarled, bony grip. No, it is to you both that I am grateful. You You are two of the bravest men I have ever met. That goes double for us, sir, Mitch said, taking Diedrich's other hand and holding it with compassion. We're never going to see you again, are we, buddy? He said, smiling. If you are fortunate, you will not. What are we going to tell people, Dee? Janelle asked as she appeared from the room. There are corpses everywhere, and no one is going to believe anything these people say. My advice to you is that you lie and pretend that you have no idea what anyone is talking about. From my previous experience with such matters, the authorities will explain this incident in any way that they can, but you must be careful as to not reveal any involvement. I suggest a story about some strange cult which invaded the hospital and wreaked mayhem. I believe they will be desperate enough for answers to accept any explanation. Sounds good to me, Russell said as he rubbed his tired eyes. Now, I have a question, Diedrich reflected. How the hell am I going to get out of this town? So, it said that there were others, Lillian said as she poured Diedrich another cup of coffee, which he immediately began filling with cream and heaping spoonfuls of sugar. His sweet tooth seemed to have been irrevocably activated, whether due to his sobriety or psychic awakening, he could not tell. Yes, many, in fact, he replied as he stirred the brown mixture. And one of them is set to conquer the world, Peter said with an incredulous smile. The baby laughed as well as he stared at his father with shining blue eyes. Diedrich looked up thoughtfully and sighed. Yes, it did. I do not conjecture about the full implications of what it was suggesting, but I feel that the being was being truthful. It simply dumbfounds me, however, to imagine how there could possibly be so many such entities to which our race would be utterly unaware. But we have not been, Lillian interjected, her eyes sharp and clear with understanding. Mankind's history is positively overflowing with tales of demons and ghosts and possession. In ancient times, the thought of powerful godlike beings competing for dominance was a common accepted fact of life. If there were only a few select individuals who were actually capable of seeing them and experiencing the power, then it would seem quite likely that they could function somewhat under the radar of modern life. Look at the damage that this single being inflicted, and yet see how casually it has been brushed under the rug by the powers that be. This entity invoked occult energies which manifested in physical phenomena, yet only a handful of people who witness these events are truly aware of the true nature of the occurrences. And I dare say that even now they are questioning their own memories in relation to what they experienced. Oh, love, are you suggesting that this sort of thing has happened, or been happening, all along? Peter said with a half smile, which soon vanished with a quick, deadly look from his wife. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. I'm guessing that these things are there, but their true power only comes in fruition through contact with people with the ability to channel their energy. Are they all bloody evil then? Peter said quite seriously. Perhaps not. Maybe there are those who are not so directly aligned with destructive forces, Diedrich added as he sipped the thick concoction with relish. Oh, then, we better get on the ball, contacting the good ones then. Peter laughed again, but his words still rang true despite his humor. There have always been tales of those gods which acted on mankind's behalf, Lillian stood once more and went to the fridge, where she eyed an open bottle of Chardonnay, but thinking of Diedrich, reached for the milk instead. Enough. I can't take any more of this talk. Diedrich, what are your plans for your return to Germany? I will return tomorrow and pretend as if I have taken some time off to deal with my drinking problem. Oh, you're going to tell everyone then? Peter said with interest. I believe it is a necessary step in my recovery, although now I do not wish to ever fall into that abysmal habit again. There is always the chance I could regress. I have taken my doctor's advice and signed into a rehabilitation program. Oh, that's very brave, Dieter. I admire your courage, Lillian said, patting his hand gently. What of your newfound abilities? Peter asked as he studied his friend closely. They are still present, but I find that now they are rather subdued. I do not find myself randomly overpowering people with suggestions, thankfully. But you can still do it then. Oh yes. And I find I still get strong intuitions almost constantly. Then you could do me a solid and suggest to Lily that she is a randy slut. Diedrich burst out laughing as Lily slapped Peter squarely across the cheek. The baby burst forth into a round of hysterical giggles, which sent them all gasping with hilarity. Diedrich approached the door of the apartment with the bouquet of a dozen roses clutched nervously in his hand. He hesitated only a moment before knocking, and waited as he heard the locks being undone from within. When the door opened, Agnes stood calmly in the doorway, gazing at him with no surprise, but only quiet curiosity. Herr Abendroth, I wondered if I was going to see you anytime soon. He looked down at his shoes, embarrassed as he held his roses forward. I seem to remember that you offered me dinner before my departure. I did, but that was under a certain stipulation, she replied coolly as she received the flowers with indifference. And whatever may that be, that you are done fucking ghosts. Her eyes met his as his jaw dropped with shock. Why the surprise, Herr Abendroth? Did you think that you were the only psychic in Berlin